Alright, buckle up for one of the biggest twists in the Revolutionary War that you probably didn't see coming. The day Spain, yes, Spain, jumps into the fray and declares war on Britain. It's June 21st, 1779, and Spain, after hanging out on the sidelines for years, finally decides, alright Britain, we've had enough of your world tour of colonization. Time for you to sit down, but don't expect this to be some grand noble move. Oh no, Spain's entrance into the war is more like a wait, you thought you could do this without me vibe. So let's set the stage here. Spain's been kind of watching this whole 13 colonies versus Britain thing like a soap opera. You got France, who had already jumped in to back the Americans cause hey, France and Britain have been frenemies for centuries. But Spain's that quiet kid in the corner with a serious grudge. See, they'd lost quite a bit of territory to Britain over the years, and while they didn't exactly want to get cozy with the Americans, they did want to kick Britain while it was down. Spain's like, okay, I don't care who wins, I just don't want Britain to win. Classic rivalry. Spain didn't exactly want to dive into this fight just for the colony's freedom. They weren't the give us liberty type, huh? It's more like Britain keeps showing off their navy, and honestly, someone's got to knock them down a peg. Spain had some solid reasons to stay out of it. Money's tight, wars are expensive, and they weren't super enthusiastic about some colonies revolting. After all, Spain had its own colonies to keep in check, and if America's revolt inspired their colonies, it'd be a nightmare back home. But after years of being needled by France, plus the fact that Britain just wouldn't stop poking around the Caribbean, Spain decided they'd had it. So Spain and France have this little huddle, and the two cousins basically strike a deal. France says, look, we'll fight Britain together, but let's keep this whole freedom and democracy talk on the down low, alright? Spain's like, cool, as long as I get Florida back. And just like that, they're in. When Spain finally declares war on June 21st, 1779, it's not exactly a fireworks moment. Spain didn't make some grand speech like for freedom or for justice. It's more like for revenge and maybe a few choice islands. The Spanish king, Carlos III, drops the declaration on Britain with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. But for Britain, this was like watching a slow-motion disaster. Suddenly, they're fighting on multiple fronts. America, France, and now Spain. Imagine trying to keep your cool while three different people are all trying to throw punches at you. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Spain wasn't planning to send troops to help the Americans. Oh no, they had their eyes set on the prize. British territories in the Caribbean, Florida, and the Mississippi Valley. Spain's like, you guys can handle the freedom part. We're here for the beachfront property. They launched campaigns to seize British-held forts in the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi. But to the Americans, it must have seemed like Spain was that friend who shows up to the party, grabs the snacks, and avoids helping clean up. One of Spain's first moves? Capture the British stronghold of Pensacola in West Florida. For Spain, this wasn't a liberate the people moment. It was more of a how's it feel to lose your favorite vacation spot, huh? And as Spain racked up victories in the South, Americans realized, wait a minute, they're not even here to help us. France was thrilled to have Spain in the fight, but there was just one tiny problem. France needed Spain to actually cooperate with them on the war effort. However, Spain was very clear about its priorities, specifically that they didn't include American independence. Every time the French suggested they take some pressure off the American colonies, Spain would roll its eyes and say, sure, but let's talk about Florida again. France must have felt like they were pulling teeth. Eventually, they struck a sort of agreement that went like, you hit them over here, we'll hit them over there. Just try to pretend we're on the same side. So while Spain never sent soldiers to fight alongside George Washington, their entry into the war was a huge deal. They took out British supply lines, kept British forces occupied in places the Americans didn't even know they cared about, and generally made life a logistical nightmare for Britain. Spain's navy was no joke either. Suddenly, Britain had to divide its fleet to defend its Caribbean colonies, making it harder to reinforce troops in America. And as Spain went after British forts along the Mississippi River, they were basically setting up a nice little buffer zone, making it harder for Britain to regroup. Meanwhile, the Americans are watching this from afar, and they're like, wait, did Spain actually just help us? In a way, yes. Spain's victories in the Gulf region and the Mississippi Valley ultimately cut off British access to supplies, forcing them to focus more on defense than offense. by creating pressure on the British, Spain inadvertently took some of the heat off American forces. Kind of like how a side quest in a video game gives you the boost you didn't know you needed. When Britain heard that Spain had joined the war, it was like that moment when you realize you left the stove on and everything's about to boil over. Britain was stretched thin, and adding Spain to the mix was the last thing they needed. It's one thing to fight one country, maybe even two, but three? Britain was feeling the burn. They had to scramble to defend their Caribbean colonies while also maintaining the fight against American and French forces. Suddenly, it felt like Britain was playing defense on a battlefield that just kept expanding. To make matters worse, Spain's presence turned the war into an international conflict. Now Britain was facing not just a rebellion, but a full-blown world war. And when the British government tried to reassure its people that they could handle it, you can almost hear the nervous laughter. Britain's invincible empire image was cracking, and everyone could see it. As the war eventually wound down and peace talks started, Spain walked in with a shopping list. They had no qualms about stating their demands. We'll take Florida, please. Oh, and throw in Minorca while you're at it. And in the end, Spain got Florida back, and they regained control of territories they'd been itching to reclaim for years. For Spain, it was all about strategy and land grabs, and they walked out of the negotiations feeling like they'd scored big. And what about the Americans? Spain helped, but without ever really helping. They never officially allied with the American colonies, but their actions made things a little easier. In a way, Spain was the awkward, self-interested ally who shows up for 5 minutes, distracts the big bad guy, then leaves with all the spoils. It was a risky move, but it paid off in the long run, and Spain left the war with just enough satisfaction to make it worth the effort. Looking back, Spain's entry into the war is often overlooked, but this was one of the biggest power moves of the American Revolution. By adding to Britain's problems, Spain indirectly helped the Americans gain their independence while making sure to get theirs in return. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, 18th century style, and a reminder that in global politics, alliances aren't about friendship, they're about leverage. And Spain played the game perfectly, showing up just in time to change the balance and take home some choice souvenirs.